Hi everybody, it's Peter Zallam's GriniFlix Adventure 8, and today we've got another interesting video. It's interviewing the photographer video, and we've got Marc Charette here.
How you doing, Peter?
Excellent, thank you.
Great, thanks for having me.
Start with, what is it?
So to answer the question of really not just what is 360 photography, because there's three elements that I like to think about in terms of 360 photography. There's the photography, there's the virtual tour, and then there's the utility for it all.
We stumbled across each other accidentally because you were driving past the studio?
Yeah, I was actually looking for a place to possibly doing some product photography when every once in a while I end up doing some of that.
Yeah.
And also a podcast that occasionally may require a little bit larger space than what I have in my home studio. So when I saw that you had a studio and you had a for hire sign, I thought, well, I should probably just say hello and see what kind of space you've got over here.
Yeah. Well, quick intro for the studio. So it is GriniFlix Studio, and this is my workshop. This is for the Adventure 8 workshop. This is for the motorcycle travel. Not that a lot of that's happening around the world right now, but the four-wheel drive stuff is commencing again, and there will be some tours coming up end of 2022 and 2023 as well. And this is my recording studio, hence this. But as Marc was saying, I do make this studio available to other photographers as well, depending on what needs to be done. We've had motorcycles here, photographing motorcycles. We've had small cars. The studio's really too small for cars, I think. But anyway, motorbikes, no problems.
We could get a Mini in here.
We've got a Mini in here. I've got my little Mazda MX-5
Oh,
here.
well, there you go.
So that works. Anyway.
Perfect.
So with all photographers, what I'd like to understand is how they got started in photography.
You know, like my photography, I don't want to call it a career because it started off as a hobby like a lot of us, right?
Yeah.
And my very first camera goes back to the 70s when I was on a trip with one of my older brothers. And I have four older brothers who were all into photography, and one of them gave me a hand-me-down Aries rangefinder. And we traveled across Canada on a cross-Canada trip, and of course you're going to be photographing the Rockies and all these wonderful places. I wanted to have a good camera for that, and that's what started the bug for me. But fast forwarding to where I'm at now, I ended up in photography more because of the fact that I ended up getting a contract selling advertising in the tourism industry. People were giving me photos to use for their ads, and usually I go, I wonder if I could take a better shot of that particular business. There could be a cellar door up in the Hunter Valley. It could be a guest room, a guest house or something like that.
Yeah.
And so I would take some extra photos, and then the clients would be saying, actually, I'd like to buy them. I'd like to use this for my ads, for my print ads. I didn't realize that my images were good enough for cash.
Yeah.
And at that moment in time, I mentioned it to a friend of mine who is he's a Google Ads guy, and he obviously understands the world of Google quite well. And he said, "Why aren't you shooting for Google?" And I said, "What's that about?" And he sent me a link to this program that back then was called Google Business View. That's what it used to be called from 2012 to roughly 2015. They changed the brand as Google does. But what it was a program where they would allow photographers to go out and shoot these 360-degree virtual tours using the Google Street View technology and publishing it directly onto Google Maps on behalf of the business. And we would charge the client for that service, which is, in fact, still what I do today. And that's how I got into it. And now I'm basically sort of gone completely into fisheye lenses and wide angle. And I'd say about 60 to 80% of the photography I do is virtual tours.
Which then leads on to, what is a virtual tour?
So to answer the question of really not just what is 360 photography, because there's three elements that I like to think about in terms of 360 photography. There's the photography, there's the virtual tour, and then there's the utility for it all.
Yeah.
Okay.
So just to that point, while we've got on that thought, to do a 360, you could literally get yourself a video camera and just stand on the spot and just go around.
Exactly. Yeah, that's right.
And then you can play that back slowly or fast, however you want. However, it's not controlled by the viewer. It's controlled by the presenter.
Correct. Yeah, so basically the production is basically the photographer or the client who directs and produces the content.
Whereas with walkthrough, it's the viewer that controls the experience.
That's exactly it. And that's where the big difference is when you understand that you're going to lose control, so to speak, and give it to the viewer and allow them to decide what they're going to see. It changes the way that you think in terms of how you actually capture the content.
So an analogy to that might be how a website is designed. You're not forcing people to go through each page in a sequential order. You let them go wherever they like.
That's right.
Self-education.
That's right. Yeah, you've got a menu, right?
Yeah.
Pick where you want to go next.
Yeah.
That's right. If you want to stick around and read an article, you read an article. If you don't want to, you don't want to. Go to the next thing. Right?
So now this is done in a visual perspective.
That's exactly it. That's a really good analogy for it. And the value and power of that is that it really I think about virtual tour photography really being more of a utility. It's a tool. And if you think about it, if you're searching for something just like you are on the web, you would also think that wouldn't it be nice to be able to search visually, especially in a place or a venue or a location whereby seeing it gives you the level of understanding to make a decision.
Yeah.
Right? So whether it be going to a function center and you're going to be hosting an event, is it big enough? Will it seat enough people? If you're going to a restaurant, do they have a table with a nice view? You know, sure, you could frame it with a nice view, but if you actually don't know that there's a really noisy table right next to you or a place where people could be sitting and make a lot of noise, you'd want to know about that, right? So by seeing it in 360 and being able to spin around gives you that utility of being able to see exactly where you are. Then beyond that, it's also how do people use those spaces. So for example, in the case of dentists, where I do virtual tours for a lot of medical facilities, being able to take a shot that's basically at the chair. So what would it feel like if I was actually in the chair? I know people go, I don't want to. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And I've actually taken a lot of imagery where I've included people in the tour. Whether it be them opening the door or sitting behind the desk or counter. So then it actually personalizes that experience a little bit more. So it falls under the category of a little bit more, I don't want to say portraiture because that's not in that case. This is very staged, but that's the idea. So so the virtual tour really is a utility. Now, when shooting these tours, the thing that we have to think about is to find the blend between making it load really fast, because people are very impatient today, and quality and resolution. And the more quality and resolution we have, the bigger the images get.
The slower it is to load.
The slower it is to load, right? So you have to find that happy medium. So some of the tools that I use for publishing help to make sure that the loading speed is very quick and is in fact platform dependent. In other words, if you're using a mobile phone, it only shows you the content relative to the size of the screen that it actually showed at that time. So you're not loading a 100 megapixel image, which by the way is what the virtual tours that I shoot are now at, now that I'm shooting with EOS R. It's, imagine a photo if you had to load a 100 megapixel photo. It just would take forever, right? You just wouldn't. So what it does is it only shows the field of view you're in at that moment in time. So that's the way the technology works. And in fact, that's the way Google Street View also works.
Is this a fad? Is 360 walkthrough is just so specialized that people getting into photography have no interest in the area, or what's going on?
Yeah. It's for a period of time people did think it was going to be a fad, but if it's a fad and it started in 2008 with Google Street View and people still use Street View all the time, and now that Apple has now hopped onto this whole bandwagon and they have Look Around, which is their competitor product. The ones that Google do and Apple do, that's actually a 360 camera on the top of the car that they actually drive around. They drive around. And
I see. So Apple are doing a similar to Google View on Apple Maps.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. So if that kind of 360 content is growing and Apple is picking it up, I'd say it's not a fad. I'd say it's going to grow in popularity and in utility. In a lot of respects too, it's important, Peter, to remember that the world of 360 is the foundation of VR. And we all know that VR and Meta and what's happening, the rebranding of Facebook and all that stuff, they're all moving towards an environment where augmented reality and virtual reality is going to be the foundation of a lot of content online. Yeah. And how do you get to that point of content? Well, the foundation is really 360 photos.
The other challenge that I find with photography, particularly these days, is trying to work out how you're going to publish your work.
Yeah.
You know, moving from film and the good old days of printing your work, that was the only way of actually showing your work. Either projecting slides or printing your work. Now everything is digital. What I find is I don't print anything. And some of the satisfaction of photography has gone out the windows because there's no way of actually showing anything to anyone other than social media. Social media is governed by algorithms, which means, you know, again, going back, you know, 4 or 5 years, Instagram was great because then it was fair to everyone to publish stuff, but now it's so controlled that there's just no joy in that sort of platform. YouTube is important to me because I think YouTube still is, for someone that's keen in photography and videography, there's still a channel, there's still a way of getting your stuff out there, and that's my way of presenting my work. So with the 360 is, I guess...
It's a little different yet again.
Yeah, because it's a business, it's a job, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, can you actually use 360 content as a, you know, as an art form? Absolutely, yes, people do. There's several ways of doing that. There are people who, Facebook, by the way, does host 360 photos natively. You can actually, but they're only one at a time. It's not a whole tour, okay, unless you actually have a special account on a business account. And we'll get into that at some other point in time. But that is one of the ways you can show 360s. But the other way where you could be a little bit more artistic with it is, number one, just pick places that are cool to shoot for the fun of shooting them, right? And the other one is different ways of doing a projection of a 360. If you've ever heard of something called a little planet photo, a little planet photo requires a 360 photo to be shot in the first place. So it's simply what it is where you actually normally crop it as 1:1, which is why it's probably the most common way of showing 360 content on Instagram, is because of that crop factor. But these little planets are a cool way of seeing things. So, so from an art form, there's a limit. It is more of a utility and more of a functional tool. You can add a lot more art to it by doing different things, but it requires going to, you know, the so-called next level.
Yeah. You know, with crypto and NFTs now, these sort of specialized art forms can become part of that as well.
That's right.
I would imagine.
That's right. One of the things that makes NFTs particularly interesting is a lot of interactivity.
Yeah.
And there are not a lot of standard photos, short of turning them into a GIF, you know, like a moving image, that kind of thing. And there's also, if you've heard of things like plotographs and that kind of thing, you know, where you've actually got parts of the image that move. Those are ways, but with a 360, that's one of those areas where you can definitely do that. I'm planning on something in that area right now.
Okay, all right. Well, you're going to have to come back to my channel, or I'll provide links to. Actually, talking about channels, do you have a channel yourself?
I do, actually. I do have a channel of my own, which is WorkPics360. It's the primary channel where I'll post things having to do with, maybe it's kind of product review-ish, you know, that kind of thing, more for the industry.
All right, so on equipment, without getting too technical at this stage, what are the choices for someone getting into this?
Yeah, in terms of the best way to get into it, if you're really an early start, is to not get any of the cameras that are on the counter over here right now, or any of these lenses, is literally to go and buy a one-shot 360 camera. And you know, probably the one I recommend the most these days is the X2 from Insta360. It's a little one-shot camera that does a pretty good job. There's also the Ricoh
Because that's
brand.
got a lens going forwards, backwards, both
That's right.
fisheye.
That's right, 2 fisheye lenses.
Yeah.
So what you're doing is you're actually only really stitching 2 images. So there's not a lot of stitching lines to deal with.
Yeah.
And it's already built right in, and it stitches right inside the camera. So you actually get an output you can use right away.
Now that file that comes out, what sort of file is that?
It's a JPEG, or it can be a DNG also, a digital negative.
Then how do you navigate within the JPEG?
The way that you navigate in a JPEG is first and foremost remembering that what causes a 360 photo to be recognized as 360 and navigable is that it has a specific crop ratio of 2:1. Because if you think about what a 360 photo is, you know, you've probably remember this when you open a map in a book and it had the world,
Yep.
right? And it was
Yep.
stretched out.
Yep.
It's a 2:1. That's the actual crop ratio, and it's basically pulling out the map and stretching it out.
Yeah.
So essentially, that's what a 360 photo is. And what you're doing when you're taking the photos, imagine when you're standing dead center in the middle of the Earth, and you're taking if you were taking a photo of the outside of that sphere. That's essentially how the cropping is done. And most software programs that or display platforms like Facebook, if they see a 2:1 crop ratio, will recognize it as being a 360, automatically say, okay, we're going to allow people to move around and rotate in it.
So then they'll have their little arrows in the...
Yeah, or it'll start to move where you move your phone, and automatically as you move your phone, the gyro picks up on it and says, oh, you're looking at something a little bit different now as you're moving along.
So you could have the JPEG, literally the JPEG on your phone.
Yeah.
And as you go around like that,
Exactly.
you're actually looking...
That's exactly it.
And you can go 360 as many times as you like, and the ends are joined.
That's right. That's right.
Okay.
So that's how you get the 360, and then basically from there to move to sort of the next level of cameras to get better quality. You can go to larger one-shot cameras which have multiple lenses, like the Insta Pro has basically, it's got, I think it's 6 or 8 lenses all the way around, and it shoots higher resolution. But then because it's actually a bigger camera, it suffers from something else that we can get into later on, from a technology problem. It's called the parallax effect. So the lenses get further apart, now it's got this other problem we just created, which is why I choose to shoot the way I do, which is to use fisheye lenses on a mirrorless camera or a DSLR. I was shooting with a 70D of all things, Canon 70D. This is an EOS R or an RP, doesn't make any difference. But most importantly, it's about shooting with a fisheye lens so that the number of shots it takes to stitch is as little as possible. Because if you got lots of images to stitch, well, the file is going to get really big, and it's going to take you a long time, and conditions around you might change by the time you get back around to the other side of the 360. So that may be an acceptable thing, and there are times and places when that's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
But most part, stick with a fisheye lens.
Mm-hmm. Do you think we can do an example here?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah?
Yeah. All right, so the first thing that you'll notice that I've done is I've located the camera relatively high up, and in this case, I'm just using just a standard tripod, but there's no ball mount here, okay? The mount I'm using over here is designed specifically to prevent something called parallax, and that's a complicated concept that basically means that the world basically has to pivot on the center of the axis of that lens, of the fisheye lens. Because if you don't get it in the center, what happens is that things that are really close, when you go to stitch the images together, they're going to look really odd. Okay? So first thing I've got to do is make sure that the lens is mounted on the dead center of this mount. So with Canon, I use the 8 to 15 millimeter fisheye, and I set it to 12 millimeters. I actually tape the lens down to make sure it doesn't move from 12 mil, because by making sure it's always at 12 mil, what I'm doing is I'm filling as much of the sensor as possible with what the lens has to show. Because if I actually go into 8 millimeter, you just get a circle. Then you'll lose a lot of pixels. Why lose all those pixels if you can gain them back? 12 millimeters tends to be about the sweet spot with this lens on a full frame camera. And the next step is to always remember to shoot in brackets, because you're probably going to have really dark areas and really bright areas, and you can't use speedlights or flashes to do this stuff. So really the most important thing is to remember that you're going to be shooting with a fisheye lens. You're going to want to make sure you fill the frame as much as you possibly can, and you're going to want to shoot in bracketed mode or in multiple time exposures. Okay. So right now, what I'm doing here is I'm simply just adjusting to make sure that we get a decent exposure. It's pretty close to being right, and I've actually got plus or minus a few stops of light in there. So now the first thing to do now is going to get ready to take the first shot.
So just, we were talking previously about parallax error?
Yeah, the parallax
Maybe
error.
you can explain that.
Sure, okay. So if we actually look at 2 points on a line over here, okay? If I were to move the lens, all right, what would happen is that basically one finger would disappear behind the other, and then it would reappear on the other side. What you want to have is so that the back finger stays always in exactly the same spot. The easiest way to do that is to actually use, like, for example, 2 lighting stands. Put one in front of the other, And what you do is, as you move the camera body, right? If you're going to move so if you're moving the camera body, as you do that, and you basically check to see where those two tripods or two stands are, they basically, the back one should always remain disappeared behind the first one. If you do that, you know that the lens is dead center on the no parallax point, and that'll help all of your stitching be a lot more accurate.
Yeah, because when the image comes into the lens, the light from this side goes to this side of the sensor, and the light from here goes to that side of the sensor. So the point of crossover is the parallax point that we're talking about.
That's exactly. Yeah. That's exactly it. I'm going to be shooting 4 shots all the way around to complete the image. And if you may recall, I actually said that I do everything manual focus, and I'm also shooting at f11. And by shooting at f11, almost everything's in focus, front to back. The other thing too is, because we don't want to have any body or motion, always shoot with a remote control. You know, make sure you got a remote, because it doesn't take much to move that camera, a little wee bit, all right? So here we are, so I'm actually going to be shooting, and we're shooting several images. Okay, so that takes care of frame number 1. And the next one we're going to shoot is the next frame, and there's a rotator on the bottom over here with 90-degree stop points. So because I'm shooting 4 all the way around, it stops at every 45 degrees, sorry, at every 90 degrees, my apologies. And so this over here, I'm guaranteed I'm not going to accidentally under or over cover the field of view. The overlap is about 30%.
Okay.
About that, yeah. If you're shooting with a bigger lens and if you're shooting more shots, you just need to take more shots, and you would use a different rotator.
Yep.
So I'll take the next shot. Okay. In fact, actually, and I may just look and see, make sure that was in focus and reshoot again, just ever so slightly. Yeah, that's better. Okay. And yeah, don't ever be scared to reshoot a shot if you think it's out of focus, because there's no coming back. Okay, so that takes care of that shot. Then we're going to shoot in this direction. And I should mention, by the way, in case you haven't noticed this, is that the shot with the fisheye lens is covering 180 degrees, looking all the way up, and just basically on a slight angle, just missing the edge of the tripods. You can just see my hand over here. Okay, you can see my hand in the shot. Okay, I'm actually rubbing my hand along the edge of the tripod leg. That gives you an idea how wide the field of view is in a fisheye shot. So that means that the bottom edge over here, I'll actually be patching that back up by either copying and pasting some of the floor or putting your brand or logo where the tripod was. So that's the only part of the image that's actually not being captured. Otherwise, it's fully spherical. So we'll take the next shot, and you'll notice that I've put the focus point on one of the chairs because I want something that's got contrast to make sure that it's going to grab focus. Okay. The other thing that we're not going to run into a problem over here, which is great because you don't have this problem, is if we were in a room where there was lots of glass and a lot of mirrors,
the reflections
would make it so that you and I would be running into another room somewhere, and that's again another reason why you want to use a remote. You wouldn't believe how many times I've actually done, especially bathrooms, when I'm doing a virtual tour inside of a bathroom. Mirrors, the reflective tiles, all of that. So and I still have to do a bit of Photoshop, but it's usually only removing the tripod legs and the camera. So, but in this case, not too much. In fact, we are going to see ourselves right over here, right? There's glass there. So we can either choose to be in the shot or we can step away. So what I would normally do is I'd come all the way over here and get completely out of the shot and activate the camera from a distance to make sure that I'm out of the shot. And once that's done, cool. And then we have completed 4 shots all the way around. And sometimes just for safety's sake, I will actually take that last shot again, just in case, because sometimes you think, has something moved? Has lighting moved? Is somebody, especially if I'm working in an environment where there's lots of people moving around, I'll take extra shots. So the next thing I'm going to do, Peter, I'd like to do this for fun, is we're going to do the same tour, the same 360 again, but we're going to have you in each one, because this is one of the really fun things you can do with the 360. Do you remember the days when you would take photos and you'd have multiple exposure or double exposures? Well, in a 360, you're stitching an image, and we can have you in there 4 times.
All right, so, yeah, okay. Well, that was fun.
That was different, wasn't it, eh?
Yeah.
So we've actually got you 4 times in the same 360. It was 4 separate shots, but once it's stitched, this is going to be Peter and your 3 twins, or your quadruplets. Was that what we call them?
Yeah, so basically we're telling 4 stories
Yeah.
with one image.
With one image, because
Yeah.
we'll have you, on the bike. We've got you standing in front of your sign, having a beer, hanging out with friends, and and chatting, and also being the photographer that you are. So in one shot, we can cover an awful lot of story. And that's one of the things that's cool with 360s. You're doing something completely different than most everyone else is doing. And staging the shot like that is something that often most 360 photographers don't do. And one of the ones that I really enjoy to do, because what it does is it gives a little bit more context than just simply a space. It's a space with a story.
Yeah, I must admit, over the years, when I've been looking at 360 stuff, a lot of stuff you just take for granted that it's all, that it's there, and it's always been there. But
yeah, exactly.
I'm educated now.
That's right.
How about you?
Yeah. How about that, eh? Gotta love it. It's good fun doing this too, because obviously when we're actually shooting a space like this is an uncommon virtual tour. Most spaces are not going to be like, like a studio / garage / space. Most of the time they're more like a publicly available, like a retail shop or a fitness center or a doctor's office, whatever the case might be. So this is a little different. So it's a little easier to stage, a little more flexibility.
I got shit to do, the aftermath of preparation. Good food, good mood, blood in circulation. One step at a time, yeah, that's how you make it. Set a goal you control and the steps you take them. I try to pick one thought, have some concentration. And if I make a mistake, it's called education. Step 1, wake up early, gonna rise with the sun. Step 2, get some good, some food in you. Step 3, think real hard about what you wanna be. Step 4, everybody just do your thing. Wake up, today's gonna be a good day. 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 Wake up, really gonna rise with the sun.
I guess if people want to find out more, it'd be nice to have you back, and we can do some more stuff on 360, on photography and everything, so that will be in future videos. Yeah. But for now, if people want to engage you in a job of any kind, how do they make contact with you?
Easiest way is probably through my website, which is WorkPics.
Okay, that'll be
WorkPics360. Yeah. Also, I have a separate brand called Central Coast Digital Media, which covers more of the broader services that I provide. Yeah. But either way around, or just email me. That's the easiest way to find me. Or on LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn a lot. If you're looking for social media, you won't find me on Instagram. You'll barely find me on Facebook, but you will find me on LinkedIn.
Excellent. And if people are looking for tuition, is it best to just go to your YouTube channel?
Easiest thing to do when it comes to that is probably first reach out to me, and so that I find, we have a conversation. I'd like to find out what exactly you're trying to do, because places where virtual tour photography is of interest is sometimes like in the real estate industry, and there's a particular way to do that, and it's different than what you do for businesses, and it's different than what you would do if you're doing it for the tourism industry. Yeah. So I can somewhat, by having a conversation, finding out where people want to go, whether or not they'll need in-person, which might be difficult if you're overseas, but we can do a lot of Zoom. I have done some Zoom training with some people. But we can talk more in terms of that aspect, and also the business element of it, because it's a big part of doing this. It can get a little expensive if you're going to buy all this new gear and you're not doing anything with it. Yeah,
and the business side of photography is really important. Like in any business, it's very hard to actually work out a formula to make money. It's very easy to lose money. It's very easy to do stuff as a hobby, which then costs you a lot of money as well. But to actually make money out of photography, that is a challenge, and everyone has to sort of work that out for themselves.
That's right.
Thank you, Mark. I really appreciate your time today and all the stuff that we covered. If it's the first time to my channel, well, actually, it's the first time to my channel, then better still then subscribe and press notifications.
So what do they say? Smash that bell. And
Smash that bell, that's it. But do give it a like. Social media algorithms, you know, they all have to they work of your interaction with whatever you're viewing. So really appreciate that. And I look forward to seeing you on the next video. And thanks again, Mark.
thank you.
Cheers. See ya.